Get ready to witness a political showdown that will leave you speechless. This isn't just another Senate hearing. This is the exposure of a betrayal that's shaken the core of American politics. In the next 90 minutes, one person's career will be dismantled by undeniable facts. Ilhan Omar thought she was untouchable, a rising star with media allies and a loyal base. But today, she picked the wrong opponent. John Kennedy, armed with evidence and unrelenting precision, is about to deliver a takedown that will echo through history. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room buzzed with tension cameras flashing and whispers rippling through the crowd. Ilhan Omar entered with her usual flair, flanked by a team of polished advisors, media strategists, and high-priced lawyers, a political machine built to weather any storm. For years, she'd dodged scrutiny with carefully crafted narratives, deflecting criticism with accusations of bias. Today, she planned to turn this routine oversight hearing into a platform to cement her influence, to paint herself as a victim of unfair targeting. She'd done it before. Discredit, deflect, destroy. It was her playbook, and it had worked. Or so she thought. John Kennedy walked in alone, carrying a single leather portfolio, his southern drawl and unassuming demeanor masking the storm he was about to unleash. No entourage, no theatrics, just a senator with facts. The contrast was stark, a political juggernaut versus a man who'd spent years mastering the art of cutting through nonsense. The committee chairman banged the gavel, calling the hearing to order. Omar seized the moment, launching her opening salvo with rehearsed indignation. "Mr. Kennedy," she began, her voice dripping with confidence, "your questions today seem rooted in a pattern of targeting certain voices in Congress. My record speaks for itself, a commitment to justice, equality, and progress." It was a classic move, framing herself as the noble underdog while implying her critics were motivated by prejudice. She leaned back, expecting Kennedy to fumble or back off. The media was ready to amplify her narrative, headlines already forming in their minds. But Kennedy's eyes didn't waver. A faint smile played at the corners of his mouth, the kind that signals a hunter who's spotted his mark. The room grew quiet, the air heavy with anticipation. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but razor-sharp, each word deliberate, slicing through the room like a blade. "Congresswoman Omar Kennedy," said his Louisiana accent, carrying a quiet authority, "since you're so proud of your record, let's take a closer look at it. Specifically, your campaign finances." The room froze. Omar's confident smirk faltered just for a split second, but long enough for everyone to notice. This wasn't the script she'd prepared for. Kennedy reached for his portfolio with the precision of a surgeon pulling out a thick stack of documents stamped with the seal of the Federal Election Commission, FEC. "I have here evidence of systematic misuse of campaign funds that raises serious questions about your commitment to the American people." The words landed like a grenade, and the chamber erupted in murmurs. Omar's advisors scrambled, whispering frantically, but Kennedy didn't pause. He held up the first document, a detailed FEC report, and projected it onto the chamber's monitors for all to see. "Let's start with something simple," he continued, his tone deceptively folksy. "Can you explain why your campaign paid $2.9 million to a consulting firm owned by a close associate for services that appear to have never been rendered?" Omar tried to recover her voice, steady but strained. "Senator, those payments were for legitimate campaign activities, voter outreach, event planning, standard operations." But Kennedy wasn't having it. He flipped to the next page, revealing bank records that traced the $2.9 million from Omar's campaign account to E Street Group, a shadowy consulting firm with no verifiable office, no staff, and no record of campaign work. "Congresswoman, this firm doesn't even have a website." No employees, no address, just a P.O. box in Delaware. Yet your campaign funneled millions to it. Care to explain? The question hung in the air unanswered as Omar's advisors leaned in, urging her to pivot. She tried deflecting with a rehearsed line about her grassroots movement, but Kennedy cut her off. "Let's not get sidetracked," he said, his voice now carrying a hint of steel. "I have receipts, literally. Bank transfers, canceled checks, and emails from your campaign directing these payments. And here's the kicker, the owner of E Street Group is your former chief of staff, who mysteriously resigned right after these transactions." The chamber's monitors lit up with a timeline, each entry a damning piece of evidence. March 2019. Omar's campaign receives $1.2 million in donations. April 2019, $800,000 transferred to E Street Group for consulting. June 2020, another $1.1 million paid to the same firm with no corresponding campaign activity. Kennedy's voice grew sharper. "Congresswoman, these aren't small errors. This is a pattern, millions of dollars funneled to a shell company while your campaign claimed it was for voter outreach. Meanwhile, your district in Minnesota saw no such outreach. No rallies, no ads, no canvassing. Where did the money go?" Omar's face tightened, her earlier confidence crumbling under the weight of Kennedy's facts. She tried to pivot again, accusing him of cherry-picking data, but Kennedy was relentless. He produced a sworn affidavit from a former campaign staffer, a young woman named Emily Carter, who'd worked for Omar's re-election bid. "Miss Carter," Kennedy said, gesturing to the secure video screen, "please tell the committee what you witnessed." The screen flickered to life, revealing Carter, a nervous but resolute figure in her late 20s, sitting in a federal facility. "I was a junior staffer on Congresswoman Omar's campaign," she began, her voice steady despite the stakes. "I was instructed to process payments to E Street Group, but when I asked for documentation, contracts, invoices, anything, I was told to stop asking questions. The campaign manager said the payments were above my pay grade. I later found out the money was going to accounts linked to the Congresswoman's associates." The chamber erupted in gasps. Campaign staffers rarely broke ranks, especially not in public testimony. Carter's words carried the weight of someone risking their career for the truth. Kennedy leaned forward, his voice calm but piercing. "Ms. Carter, were you ever threatened for asking about these payments?" Carter nodded, her eyes glistening. "Yes, Senator. I was told my job was at risk if I kept digging. When I pushed back, I was fired within a week. Omar's team was in chaos now, advisors whispering furiously, some slipping out of the room to make calls. Social media was already exploding, with hashtag Omar fraud trending, as clips of Carter's testimony spread like wildfire. But Kennedy wasn't done. He produced internal campaign emails projected for all to see. One from Omar's campaign manager to her chief of staff read, "Make sure the E Street payments are buried in the FEC reports. Call it consulting and don't specify." Another email from Omar herself was even more damning. "We need to move the funds before the next audit. E Street can handle it." Kennedy's voice cut through the stunned silence. "Congresswoman, these emails suggest you were directly involved in hiding these transactions. This isn't sloppy bookkeeping. This is deliberate." Omar's response was weak, a stammered claim about administrative errors, but the room wasn't buying it. The evidence was too clear, too meticulously compiled. Kennedy flipped to the next set of documents, bank records, showing the E Street Group funds being wired to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. "Let's follow the money," he said, his tone almost conversational, but laced with righteous indignation. "These accounts are linked to your former chief of staff and a network of shell companies. And here's the interesting part. Some of these funds ended up in personal accounts tied to your family members. The monitors displayed a financial trail, $500 to $1,000, to an account in Omar's sister's name, $300 to a cousin's business venture. The implications were staggering. Campaign donations meant to serve voters were being siphoned off for personal gain. Kennedy's questions came like bullets. Congresswoman, did your sister provide campaign services worth $500,000? Did your cousin's startup produce a single flyer for your re-election? Or was this just a way to funnel money out of your campaign? Omar's face was ashen now, her earlier bravado gone. She tried to deflect, claiming the payments were for legitimate family businesses, but Kennedy had anticipated every move. He produced tax records showing the family businesses had no revenue, no employees, and no verifiable operations. "These aren't businesses," Kennedy said, his voice rising with controlled fury. "These are fronts. You took money from hard-working Americans' donors who believed in you, and you funneled it to your inner circle. That's not leadership. That's betrayal." The chamber was in chaos, senators on their feet, reporters typing furiously. Omar's advisors were visibly panicking, one dropping a stack of papers in the commotion. Kennedy, unmoved, held up a final piece of evidence, a whistleblower report from the FEC itself confirming an ongoing investigation into Omar's campaign for systematic financial irregularities. The room fell silent as Kennedy delivered his closing blow for the round. "Congresswoman Omar, you've built a career on claiming to fight for the little guy. But these documents tell a different story. You've been fleecing the very people you claim to represent, using their donations to enrich yourself and your family. This isn't about justice or equality. This is about greed." The gavel banged, signaling a 15-minute recess, but the damage was done. Omar sat motionless. Her political armor cracked her team, scrambling to salvage what was left of her credibility. Social media was ablaze with #Kennedy exposes Omar, trending worldwide. Clips of his calm, methodical dismantling of her defenses were shared millions of times. Kennedy, meanwhile, sat quietly, his portfolio still in hand, preparing for the next round. This was just the beginning, and he was far from finished. The recess felt like an eternity for Omar. Her advisors huddled in a side room, their faces grim, whispering about damage control and legal strategies. "We need to spin this as a misunderstanding," one urged. But Omar knew the truth was slipping out of her grasp. Kennedy's evidence wasn't just political theater. It was prosecutorial, airtight, and devastating. The man who'd walked into the hearing with nothing but a leather portfolio had turned the tables, exposing a web of financial misconduct that threatened to end her career. As the hearing prepared to reconvene, Kennedy sat calmly, his southern charm belying the storm he was about to unleash. Round one was over, and Omar was already bleeding. But the senator from Louisiana was just getting started, and the next folder in his portfolio promised to hit even harder. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room was still reeling from the bombshell revelations of round one. Ilhan Omar's carefully constructed image had taken a brutal hit, her campaign finance misconduct laid bare by John Kennedy's relentless facts. Social media was ablaze with #KennedyExpose, Omar trending globally as millions shared clips of his calm, surgical dismantling of her defenses. The 15-minute recess had done little to ease the tension. Omar's team huddled in a corner, their faces pale, frantically flipping through legal pads and firing off messages to allies. They knew the storm wasn't over. Kennedy, meanwhile, sat at his table, his leather portfolio untouched, his expression as calm as a Louisiana bayou at dawn. But beneath that folksy exterior burned a fire of determination. He wasn't here to play politics, he was here to expose truth. As the gavel banged to reconvene the hearing, the room fell silent, every eye on Kennedy. He leaned forward, his voice steady, carrying that southern drawl that could charm or cut, depending on the moment. "Congresswoman Omar," he began, his tone deceptively mild. "We've talked about your campaign funds. Now, let's talk about your personal finances, specifically some very curious transactions tied to foreign entities." The words hit like a thunderclap. Omar's eyes widened, her hands gripping the table as if bracing for impact. Her advisors froze, their whispers dying mid-sentence. Kennedy reached for his portfolio with the same deliberate precision that had marked his first round, pulling out a new folder stamped with Treasury Department seals and marked Financial Crimes Investigation. The chamber's monitors flickered to life, displaying a complex web of bank records, wire transfers, and international financial reports. "I have here evidence from the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCENs. For those keeping score at home," Kennedy said, his voice carrying a hint of righteous indignation. "These documents show a pattern of payments to accounts linked to you, Congresswoman, from organizations with ties to foreign interests. Care to explain?" The question hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. Omar tried to muster a response, her voice faltering. "Senator, my financial dealings are transparent and comply with all regulations. These accusations are baseless." But Kennedy's faint smile said he'd anticipated her dodge. He held up a single sheet, a FinCEN report highlighted in bold red. "Let's test that transparency, shall we?" The monitors zoomed in on the document, revealing a $1.4 million wire transfer from an entity called Horizon Global Partners, based in Qatar, to an account linked to Omar's family trust. The date was recent, too recent for comfort. Kennedy's voice cut through the stunned silence. "Congresswoman, Horizon Global Partners is a known front for foreign lobbying efforts. This payment landed in your family's account just 48 hours after you attended a closed-door meeting with foreign diplomats. Coincidence?" Omar's face tightened, her earlier composure crumbling. She tried to pivot, claiming the funds were for a community development project in her district, but Kennedy was ready. He flipped to the next document, a series of emails between Omar's office and Horizon Global's representatives. One email from Omar's chief of staff read, "Confirm receipt of funds. Project details to follow, but keep this off the public ledger." Kennedy's eyebrow raised slightly, his voice dripping with southern sarcasm. "Project details to follow, Congresswoman. I've checked. There's no community project in your district tied to this money. No schools, no clinics, no nothing. So where'd the $1.4 million go?" The chamber erupted in murmurs, senators exchanging glances, reporters typing furiously. Omar's team was in full panic mode now, one advisor spilling coffee in the chaos. Kennedy didn't flinch. He produced a second FinCEN report, this one detailing a $2.1 million transfer from a Dubai-based firm, Al Nasser Holdings, to another account tied to Omar's family. "Here's another one," Kennedy said, his tone calm but relentless. "Al Nasser Holdings has been flagged by Treasury for suspected ties to foreign influence operations. This payment came right after you pushed for a congressional resolution that curiously aligned with the interests of certain Middle Eastern governments. Care to comment?" Omar's response was weak, a stammered claim about supporting global peace initiatives, but the room wasn't buying it. Kennedy held up a third document, a forensic financial analysis showing a pattern. Large payments from foreign entities consistently followed Omar's high-profile votes or public statements. "This isn't a one-off," Kennedy said, his voice rising with controlled fury. "This is a system. You vote, you speak, you get paid. That's not representation. That's something else entirely. The monitors displayed a timeline, each entry a gut punch. January, Omar votes against sanctions on a foreign regime. February, $800,000 from a shell company in the Bahamas. June, Omar speaks at an international conference. July, $1.7 million from an unregistered foreign entity. The pattern was undeniable, and Kennedy drove it home. Congresswoman, these payments total over $5 million in just 2 years. For a public servant making $174,000 a year, that's quite a side hustle. The chamber gasped, the weight of the numbers sinking in. Omar tried to deflect, accusing Kennedy of misrepresenting the data, but he was ready with a trump card. "Let's bring in someone who can clarify," he said, gesturing to the secure video screen. The room fell silent as the screen flickered to life, revealing a middle-aged man in a suit sitting in a federal office. The nameplate read, "Michael Reynolds, Senior Investigator, FinCEN." Reynolds's voice was steady, carrying the weight of decades in financial crime investigations. "Senator Kennedy, I've led the team analyzing these transactions," he began. "The accounts tied to Congresswoman Omar show a consistent pattern of receiving funds from entities linked to foreign governments or their proxies. These entities are under investigation for attempting to influence U.S. policy through financial means." The chamber erupted in shocked whispers. FinCEN investigators rarely testified publicly, and Reynolds's presence signaled the gravity of the situation. "Mr. Reynolds," Kennedy asked, his voice calm but piercing, "can you confirm the legitimacy of these transactions?" Reynolds nodded, his expression grim. "The funds are real, and the transfers are verified. We've traced them through multiple shell companies designed to obscure their origins. The timing of these payments aligns with specific actions by the Congresswoman, raising red flags about potential foreign influence." Omar's advisors were scrambling now, some slipping out to make desperate calls. Social media was exploding, with #OmarMoney trending alongside #Kennedy exposes Omar. Clips of Reynolds's testimony were shared millions of times, each retweet amplifying the scandal. But Kennedy wasn't done. He produced a stack of intercepted communications emails between Omar's office and foreign intermediaries. One from a Dubai-based contact read, "Payment confirmed. Expect your support on the upcoming resolution." Another from Omar's office replied, "Understood. We'll deliver." Kennedy's voice cut through the chaos. "Congresswoman, these emails suggest you were coordinating with foreign entities to shape U.S. policy. That's not just a violation of ethics. It's a violation of trust." Omar's response was barely audible, a weak claim about cultural exchange programs, but Kennedy shut it down. "Cultural exchange doesn't pay $5 million into offshore accounts," he said, his southern drawl now laced with steel. "This looks like a pay-to-play scheme, plain and simple." The monitors shifted to a new set of documents, bank records showing the funds moving from Omar's family accounts to luxury purchases, a $1.2 million condo in Miami, a $300,000 yacht registered under a relative's name. Kennedy's questions came like a barrage. "Congresswoman, did your voters in Minnesota donate to your campaign so your family could buy beachfront property? Or was this the payoff for selling out American interests?" The room was in chaos now, senators on their feet, reporters shouting questions. Omar's face was pale, her hands shaking as she tried to formulate a response. "This is all taken out of context," she stammered, but the evidence was overwhelming. Kennedy held up a final piece, a whistleblower report from a former Treasury official who'd flagged Omar's accounts years ago. This official, Kennedy said, was pressured to drop the investigation after your office intervened. "Why would you do that, Congresswoman, if everything was above board?" The chamber fell silent as Kennedy delivered his closing salvo. Congresswoman Omar, you've claimed to champion the underserved, but these documents tell a different story. You've been taking money from foreign entities while your district struggles. You've been living large while your constituents scrape by. That's not leadership, it's betrayal. The gavel banged, signaling another recess, but the damage was catastrophic. Omar sat frozen, her political armor shattered, her team in disarray. Social media was a firestorm, with #OmarMoney and Kennedy. Exposes Omar dominating global trends. Kennedy, calm as ever, gathered his documents, his expression unreadable, but resolute. Round 2 was over, and Omar was reeling. But the senator from Louisiana was far from finished. The next folder in his portfolio, marked with even more ominous seals, promised to hit harder still. As the recess began, Omar's team knew the worst was yet to come, and Kennedy's quiet confidence signaled he was ready to deliver it. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room was a pressure cooker, the air thick with anticipation after John Kennedy's devastating revelations about Ilhan Omar's financial misconduct. Social media was a wildfire with #KennedyExposesOmar and #OmarMoney trending at unprecedented levels, clips of the senator's calm, methodical takedown racking up millions of views. The recess had been a blur of chaos for Omar's team, their frantic whispers and hurried phone calls betraying a campaign on the brink of collapse. Omar sat at her table, her once confident demeanor replaced by a strained mask of composure, her advisors visibly rattled. Across the room, Kennedy remained unruffled, his leather portfolio resting in front of him like a loaded weapon. His southern charm masked a relentless determination, and as the gavel banged to reconvene, every eye in the chamber locked onto him. He leaned forward, his voice steady, carrying that Louisiana drawl that could disarm or destroy. Congresswoman Omar, he began, his tone calm but cutting. We've covered your campaign funds and your foreign money. Now let's talk about your words, specifically how they've threatened the unity and security of this nation. The words landed like a sledgehammer. Omar's face tightened, her hands clenching as she braced for the next blow. Kennedy reached for his portfolio with the same surgical precision, pulling out a new folder labeled Public Statements and National Security. The chamber's monitors flickered to life, displaying a montage of Omar's speeches, tweets, and interviews, each time stamped and annotated with context. I have here a record of your public statements, Kennedy said, his voice carrying a hint of righteous indignation. Words matter, Congresswoman, especially when they come from a sitting member of Congress. And yours have caused division, confusion, and frankly alarm among those tasked with protecting this country. Omar tried to interrupt, her voice sharp with defiance. Senator, my statements reflect my commitment to truth and justice. I speak for the marginalized, and I won't be silenced. But Kennedy's faint smile signaled he was ready for her. He held up a single page, a transcript of a speech Omar had given at a controversial event. Let's start with this, he said, his tone deceptively mild. You said, and I quote, certain policies of this country are rooted in oppression, and we must dismantle them at all costs. Care to clarify what you meant by all costs? The room fell silent, the weight of the question sinking in. Omar's advisors leaned in, urging her to pivot, but Kennedy didn't give her the chance. He projected the full speech onto the monitors, highlighting the phrase in bold. Congresswoman, this wasn't a one-off. You've made repeated statements questioning the legitimacy of American institutions, stirring division, and in some cases echoing talking points that align with adversaries of the United States. The monitors shifted to a series of tweets, each one more inflammatory than the last. One read, America's foreign policy is a tool of imperialism, propping up corrupt regimes. Another, we must rethink our alliances, starting with those who don't share our values. Kennedy's voice grew sharper. These aren't just opinions, Congresswoman. These are public statements that have been cited by foreign actors to undermine American credibility. And I've got someone who can explain the consequences. The chamber's P2 secure video screen flickered to life, revealing a woman in her 50s with the composed bearing of a seasoned law enforcement professional. The nameplate read, Agent Laura Bennett, former FBI counterintelligence supervisor. The room erupted in murmurs. FBI agents rarely testified publicly, and Bennett's presence signaled something serious was unfolding. Agent Bennett Kennedy said, his voice respectful but firm. Please, tell the committee how Congresswoman Omar's statements have impacted national security. Bennett's voice was steady, but her eyes burned with intensity. Senator, over the past 3 years, the FBI has tracked a rise in domestic and international actors using the Congresswoman's statements to fuel anti-American sentiment. Her rhetoric has been amplified by known adversaries, including state-sponsored media outlets, to justify actions against U.S. interests. The chamber gasped, the implications staggering. Bennett continued, her voice unwavering. In one instance, a foreign outlet quoted her statements to recruit for extremist causes, claiming she validated their narrative. This led to a measurable uptick in threats against American personnel overseas. Omar's face was pale now, her earlier defiance crumbling. She tried to respond, claiming her words were taken out of context, but Kennedy was relentless. He produced a classified FBI report, partially redacted but damning in its clarity. This report, he said, holding it up, details how your statements were used in propaganda campaigns by groups hostile to the United States. It's not just about free speech, Congresswoman. It's about the responsibility that comes with your platform. The monitors displayed a timeline correlating Omar's statements with spikes in online extremist activity. One entry showed a speech she gave questioning U.S. military presence abroad, followed by a surge in social media posts from accounts linked to foreign adversaries. This isn't speculation, Kennedy said, his voice rising with controlled fury. Your words gave ammunition to those who want to harm this country. And you knew it. Omar's team was in chaos, advisors scrambling to craft a response. Social media was exploding, with #OmarDivides trending alongside #Kennedy exposes Omar. Clips of Bennett's testimony were shared millions of times, each retweet amplifying the scandal. But Kennedy wasn't done. He produced a stack of intercepted communications emails from Omar's office to media outlets, instructing them to amplify her controversial statements. One email read, "Push the narrative hard. We need to shift the conversation on U.S. policy." Kennedy's voice cut through the stunned silence. Congresswoman, you weren't just speaking off the cuff. You were orchestrating a campaign to divide Americans and weaken our standing abroad. Why Omar's response was weak, a stammered claim about advocating for change. But Kennedy shut it down. Change doesn't mean handing propaganda victories to our enemies, he said, his southern drawl laced with steel. That's not advocacy. That's recklessness. The monitors shifted to a new set of documents, intelligence assessments from the Department of Homeland Security. These reports, Kennedy said, show that your statements have been used to justify cyber attacks against U.S. infrastructure. One group linked to a foreign government cited your words to rally support for a hack that disrupted critical systems in Minnesota, your own district. The chamber erupted in gasps, the personal impact hitting home. Kennedy's questions came like a barrage. Congresswoman, did you know your words were being used to harm the very people you represent? Or did you just not care? Omar's face was ashen, her hands trembling as she tried to formulate a response. "I never intended to cause harm," she stammered, but the room wasn't buying it. Kennedy held up a final piece of evidence, a letter from a coalition of national security experts warning about the impact of Omar's rhetoric. "These experts," he said, "begged you to tone it down. You ignored them. Why?" The chamber fell silent as Kennedy delivered his closing blow for the round. "Congresswoman Omar, you've claimed to fight for justice, but your words have divided this nation and emboldened its enemies. You've used your platform to sow discord, and the consequences have been real threats, cyber attacks, and eroded trust. That's not leadership. That's betrayal." The gavel banged, signaling another recess, but the damage was catastrophic. Omar sat frozen, her political armor in tatters, her team scrambling to salvage what was left of her reputation. Social media was a firestorm, with hashtag Omar divides and hashtag Kennedy exposes Omar dominating global trends. Kennedy, calm as ever, gathered his documents, his expression resolute. Round 3 was over, and Omar was reeling, but the senator from Louisiana was far from finished. The next folder in his portfolio, marked with ominous seals, promised to deliver the final blow. As the recess began, Omar's team knew the worst was yet to come, and Kennedy's quiet confidence signaled he was ready to end it. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room was a crucible of tension, the weight of John Kennedy's relentless revelations hanging heavy in the air. Ilhan Omar's political fortress had crumbled, her campaign finance abuses, suspicious foreign payments, and divisive rhetoric exposed in brutal detail. Social media was a tempest, with hashtag Kennedy exposes Omar and Omar. Divides trending at historic levels, clips of Kennedy's calm, devastating takedown shared billions of times. The recess had been a desperate scramble for Omar's team, their faces ashen, their whispers frantic, as they grappled with the wreckage of her reputation. Omar sat motionless, her once vibrant presence reduced to a shadow, her advisors powerless to stem the tide. Across the room, Kennedy remained a pillar of resolve, his leather portfolio a symbol of truth's unyielding power. As the gavel banged to reconvene, the chamber fell silent, every eye on the senator from Louisiana. He stood, his southern drawl carrying a quiet authority that filled the room. "Congresswoman Omar." He began, his voice steady but resonant. "We've seen the evidence, your campaign fraud, your foreign dealings, your reckless words. Now let's talk about the consequences, not just for you, but for the people you claim to serve." The words struck like a final verdict. Omar's hands trembled, her eyes fixed on the table, unable to meet Kennedy's gaze. He reached for his portfolio one last time, pulling out a folder marked Community Impact and Accountability with Department of Justice seals. The monitors flickered, displaying letters from community leaders in Omar's Minnesota district. Congresswoman Kennedy said, his tone carrying a mix of indignation and sorrow. "You've built a career on claiming to represent the underserved, especially immigrant communities. But your actions have betrayed them." He held up a letter from a Somali-American community group, its words projected for all to see. "This is from the people of your district," he said. "They say your leadership has brought division, not unity. They say your scandals have cast a shadow over their community, making it harder for honest immigrants to be heard." The chamber murmured, the personal impact hitting home. Omar tried to respond, her voice weak. "I've always fought for my community," she said, but Kennedy cut through the deflection with surgical precision. "Let's hear from them directly," he said, gesturing to the secure video screen. It flickered to life, revealing Amina Hassan, a Somali-American community organizer in her 40s sitting in a Minneapolis community center. Her voice was steady, tinged with frustration. "Senator Kennedy, our community trusted Congresswoman Omar to represent us with integrity. But her actions, hiding money, taking foreign funds, stirring division, have hurt us. We're stereotyped now, questioned because of her scandals. We deserve better." The chamber fell silent, Hassan's words carrying the weight of a community's betrayal. Kennedy nodded, his voice gentle but firm. "Ms. Hassan, how has this impacted your community's trust in government?" Hassan's eyes glistened. "It's made it harder for us to advocate for our needs. People assume we're all complicit in her actions. We're not. We want leaders who put our country first, not their own gain." Omar's face was ashen, her advisors frozen in defeat. Social media erupted with #OmarBetrays, trending alongside #KennedyExposesOmar. Kennedy produced a Department of Justice memo, its contents stark. "This memo," he said, "confirms an ongoing investigation into your actions, Congresswoman. The evidence we've presented, campaign fraud, foreign payments, divisive rhetoric, has been referred for potential charges, including ethics violations and possible violations of federal law." The chamber gasped, the implications seismic. Kennedy's voice grew harder. "Your actions didn't just hurt you. They hurt the people of Minnesota, the immigrant communities you claim to champion, and the trust Americans have in their leaders." He displayed a chart showing declining trust in government among Omar's constituents correlated with her scandals. "This is the real cost," he said. "Not just dollars, but faith in our system." Kennedy turned to the gallery where community leaders and veterans sat, their faces a mix of resolve and hope. "This hearing," he said, his voice rising with moral authority, "is about more than one person's failures. It's about proving that no one is above accountability. That's the lesson here. Leadership isn't about power or headlines. It's about serving the people who trust you, putting their needs above your own." The chamber was silent, his words resonating like a call to action. He gestured to the evidence folders on his table. "We've shown the truth, fraud, foreign influence, division. But more than that, we've shown that when good people stand up, justice prevails." The monitors displayed a final image, a photo of Minneapolis residents at a community meeting holding signs demanding accountability. "These are your voters," Congresswoman Kennedy said. "They deserve leaders who honor their trust, not exploit it." The gavel banged, signaling the hearing's end, but Kennedy had one final message. "To every American watching," he said, his voice steady and clear, "this is your country. Demand leaders who serve with integrity. Demand transparency. Demand accountability. Because when we hold the powerful to account, we rebuild trust in our nation." The chamber erupted in applause, a thunderous wave that lasted minutes. Omar sat silent, her political career in ruins, as federal officials prepared to escort her for questioning. Kennedy gathered his portfolio, his expression calm but resolute. Social media was a firestorm with #Kennedy. Hero trending globally, his words inspiring millions. The lesson was clear. Accountability is the bedrock of democracy, and integrity must guide those who lead. As Kennedy left the chamber, community leaders approached, thanking him for defending their dignity. A young Somali-American man shook his hand, saying, "You gave us our voice back." The hearing had done more than expose Omar. It had restored faith in justice, showing that truth could triumph over corruption. Kennedy's legacy was cemented not as a politician, but as a patriot, who proved that honest leadership could heal a fractured nation.